Hello, Professor Rychlak, and welcome to the Romanian Journalist Association. We have a discussion tonight about the General Ion Mihai Pacepa. I know you had a couple of interviews already with Romanian media, I guess, but it's an interesting subject. So you are professor of law at the University of Mississippi, right?
That's right.
You used to be a close friend of General Pacepa. Actually, who is Ronald J Rychlak? And how did you meet the general?
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a law professor at the University of Mississippi. As you said, I've been on the faculty here since 1987. Prior to that, I was in the practice of law in Chicago, Illinois. I'm married. I have 6 grown children, and so that's who I am, I suppose. I met Pacepa. I wrote a book that was first published in the year 2000 called Hitler, the War, and the Pope, which was about Pope Pius XII, the leader of the Catholic Church during World War II. And the publisher asked for a second edition around 2007, 2006, 2007. Around this time, in 2007, Pacepa, I didn't know at all, wrote a column in an online journal, the National Review Online, that said that the concept of Pius XII being Hitler's pope, or not being sufficiently concerned about the Jews, or whatever the current attack on him was in fact a part of Soviet disinformation that he had helped spread, he had helped create when he was part of the Soviet intelligence bloc in Romania. Well, I'm trying to write a new edition of my book, and to me this was the most interesting issue that was new in this time frame, because if it held up, if it seemed true, then it had enormous implications. So I spent about 2 years really analyzing that one question: does this allegation make sense? And ultimately I concluded that it did. I wrote a new chapter for the second edition of my book, which came out in the year 2010. When I got that chapter done, I sent it to National Review Online, and I asked, so this is about 2009, it's about a year before the book came out. And I said, can you get this to that guy, Pacepa? Again, I really didn't know who he was, but obviously they were in contact with him, right? So they got it to him, and about 4 days later, I got an email from him. We carried on an email correspondence for several years, ultimately agreeing to write the book Disinformation together. That was published in 2013. By the way, and we wrote that book. I had never met him face to face. I've met him first face to face after that book came out. And even after I first met him, I didn't know. I used to joke, I know Superman, but I don't know Clark Kent. I don't know whether Romanian people will understand that reference, but I knew Pacepa, but I didn't know his secret identity. And that lasted for a few years. And then probably for the last 5 or 6 years, I've known him fully, and came to know him and his wife. And we had a very, very fond, friendly relationship. We spent time together, and so when he was in the hospital, he got COVID about 2 weeks ago. I knew that. I called him when he was in the hospital. We spoke when he was in the hospital. The day before he passed, his wife was with him. She called me up that night. This was a Saturday night. She called me up, and she knew that he was dying. She knew he would not come home. Then she called me early Sunday, and she had been told overnight that he'd passed away.
So his wife is American, right? She's
Yes.
American, yes. It looks like he used to live in Florida, but this information is not confirmed. And it also looks like he had a couple of plastic surgeries too, I guess. Do you think he was in danger?
Certainly he was early in the process. By the time I knew him, I asked him once. I said, "Do you really think someone would still be out to get you?" And he could point to a few cases around the world where there had been situations that were enough that he was still concerned. I mean, he still cared about his wife and his word for her safety as well. But then he also told me a very interesting thing one time. He said, "Look, I've built a new life around these friends we have today, our neighbors and friends today. And I really don't want them to think I've been lying to them for 30 or 40 years or however long it's been and discover I'm a person they didn't think I was." And so he didn't want to encounter, there was a certain amount of protecting his new life that was important to him.
But was he protected by the American Secret Services as well, or you don't know that?
My understanding is that he was not at the end, that early he was, and he at some point decided to take control over his own security and did not take his identity. I think he wrote about this. So his identity was compromised by a couple of FBI agents at one point, and that was the second. I think the second time his identity was compromised, and he just said, "Forget it. I'm going to do it myself now. Not going to rely on the government to do that."
Because even after the fall of Ceausescu regime, he was hiding as well. I mean, he was, that's the question is, was he hiding? Was he in danger even after 1989?
He certainly thought so. I mean, he told me, and I've read that there were two separate $1 million bounties on his head, that there was a team of assassins. He was told at one point by American governmental agents to pack and get out of the town right away because his identity had been compromised. And there was believed to be a team of assassins looking for him. I've also been told that Carlos the Jackal, the notorious assassin, took a contract on him as well.
Yeah, but that was before 89, right? I mean, after
Oh, yeah.
89, yeah, absolutely. Some Romanian people, well, say that he was trained by the Russians to infiltrate the American Secret Services and, the American society. Do you think it might be an option? Like, he was so good, he fooled everyone, and, he was, in fact, a Russian asset?
No, I don't. I mean, I think I know him well enough and I know his history well enough that I do not believe that's possible. President Carter was concerned about that when he came over. President Carter almost sent him back to what would have been a death sentence. The CIA operatives who were working with him convinced President Carter not to do that. He spent 3 years in debriefing with the CIA. He later received a letter of commendation for all he had done by providing that information to the CIA. That information largely became the book Red Horizons, that I'm sure anybody who knows much about him would be familiar with.
Yep.
And so and then after that, he was not part of CIA. I mean, he then lived a civilian life. So I don't see any way it makes any sense to think that he was infiltrating America.
But I think his wife was a former CIA as well, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think he wrote about that. She, in fact, was one of the people who helped convince Carter not to send him back.
And he was also talking about what happens now in the world. And I was wondering if how was he connected to people? Like, was he connected to people who had information about because obviously he was the chief of Ceausescu's secret police in 1978, right? But now in 2020, like, did he have any contacts, like anyone, to get information from, or how did he understand the today's reality?
I believe he understood it as an astute student looking at the news and looking at what he saw. I do not believe he had close contact. One of the most interesting things that happened between myself and him, and I'll put this probably around 2010, 2011 in there. He wrote me a note one time and said it was so refreshing to him to be Pacepa. because his communications to me were as Pacepa. He didn't speak in that voice. But he would write columns. He'd write political columns or some books, of course. But when he was just communicating with someone, he didn't get to be Pacepa with virtually anyone. But I only knew him as Pacepa at that time, and to me he was Pacepa. And it was kind of out of the blue. He just said how nice it was for him to be able to be Pacepa again.
Did you? I think you saw him, right? Really, in reality, was he very different from the pictures we already know? A couple of them, maybe one or two. Was he very
No, I don't
different?
think so. I don't know. I don't think he was very different.
Oh, oh, okay.
I don't think.
Oh, so he was similar to the old pictures.
I mean, he was obviously was much older than the pictures, but
Oh yeah, of course.
it's not nothing that I would think to be dramatic. I wouldn't be surprised to say this was him when he was younger. I'm not sure what the plastic surgery did, because he told me he had two, but I'm not sure exactly what they did.
A lot of Romanians say about him that he was a traitor. What do you think about that? Was he a traitor in your opinion?
He, I mean, he obviously was very much opposed to Ceausescu. He believed that Ceausescu was an evil leader. He had been ordered to carry out the assassination of the head of the Romanian head of Radio Free Europe. He didn't want to do that. He'd seen evil things Ceausescu did. I mean, it's everything he wrote about in Red Horizons. So he loved Romania. He did not like the communist government. But I mean, to his dying day, he followed the World Cup. He followed the news. He followed the Olympic sports. He would tell me what was going on in Romanian news. I mean, he had a love for Romania, that as a country. He did not like Ceausescu. He did not believe in communism. He risked everything. He lived at the top of the communist world, a life of luxury, which he left behind, risking his own life to do what he thought was to help free Romania, the Romanian people, from the confines of communism.
But I think he left his daughter in Romania, right? When
He and I discussed that. He had reasons and what he thought was acceptable. Although then she came very close to being assassinated at one point, and it was hard for him. He and I talked about that.
Some people ask, why didn't he try to kill Ceausescu to do something in Romania while he was a top general, whatever? Why didn't he try to change the regime from inside?
I honestly didn't. I never asked him that, so I would have to just speculate. But I mean, so I don't know. I can give you good reasons. I think there are good reasons why I would not have, but I don't honestly know his opinion.
Okay. How did he see the fall of Ceausescu regime? Because obviously, after the so-called, in my opinion, revolution, a lot of old communists and old Securitate agents, were in power, and they became a bit like in Russia or whatever. They became like businessmen and businesswomen, and the people with a lot of money, very rich people, and very influenced in politics. How did he see? Because I suppose he knew all these, like a lot of these guys, like Iliescu, and all these the old communists, right, who came actually in power. How did he see that? What were his comments about this?
Well, again, I didn't live with him, didn't know him at that time. But in talking about it, there are a couple of things that came through. One was he would talk about how after the fall of Nazism, there were denazification panels where they went through and removed the bad Nazis so they did not come back into power. And he would always say that never happened with the fall of communism, and he thinks it should have happened, so this wouldn't have happened. And then the other thing that was interesting that he told me was we were looking at Russia, and we're looking how Putin came back to power. When disinformation was written, most Americans still thought Putin was kind of a good guy. He had a good reputation in the United States at that time. So this is one of the first books was highly critical of Putin. He said, I don't know whether this is the case in Russia. He said, but I know we had a plan. The communists had a plan in Romania that should communism ever fall, you take agents and you send them out into more remote areas until things settle back. Then you bring them back, get them in power. They bring the old intelligence people around them. And you basically, you may not even call it communism, but you rebuild exactly what we've seen in Russia, and that you're telling me is true in Romania. And so he said there was a plan to do that. And he did what he could to expose that and say that that was happening. And he was against it. He thought there should have been some, removal of those people from positions of authority.
So what you're saying is about the KGB didn't care about communism or anything, just the KGB or FSB now. They're just trying to keep influence in the Eastern Europe, probably in some of the countries as well, not only Romania, but I suppose.
Well, they're probably doing, but they're also, I think if you, and I'm sorry, I don't know Romania as well as he would have, but you could look at Russia and you can say, Putin has put people back in power who are precisely the same people that essentially hold the same views and in essence are reestablishing the same type of government. And Putin said that the collapse of the Soviet bloc was the tragedy of the 20th century. He obviously would like to rebuild it, and I'm sure that there are similar situations in Romania.
In the book Disinformation, there was also a movie. I guess I had the chance to watch that movie, and the movie was talking about the KGB who is trying to destroy the Western world, and especially the U.S. Do you think that they succeeded today? With what happens in the U.S. right now, like it's a bit a mess. What happened? What the elections and everything. Do you think that would be the result of all this KGB's work for years?
I think it's fair to ask that question. I think I don't know where America is going to land. I think Pacepa was deeply concerned that he risked his life and he left everything at risk and behind him to come to a country to escape. And then this country is moving in that direction. I think that was very disheartening to him. And I know he wanted to do what he could to push back against that. And I think he certainly did he did more than you could expect any individual to do. Whether it was enough, time will tell, I suppose. But he's not the only one. We can't rely solely on him. Well, he kept saying we need more Pacepas, and what he meant was we need people who have been under communism, who've been in totalitarian regimes, to come across to risk their lives to expose, as he did, expose the horror, the evil, the problems in those regimes, so that the West, and particularly the United States, won't fall into those situations, those kind of things. And he really encouraged that, wanted that, and I always hoped. He had an interesting. He had a fascination of people who had left communism. He read the books and followed closely people who left communism and talked about what they left behind, and as a warning of what could happen here.
Do you think America could go could slip in the communist path or anything, or the left, Marxism or anything? Like, is it possible?
Yeah, is it at this moment in time? I think it's possible, because I think there are elements in our Congress that are pushing very hard in that direction. I personally hope that they will not be successful and that people will push back. I think losing Pacepa, we lost an important voice in the United States. You know, he just came out with just released a book in the past couple of weeks. This has come out. I don't know if you've seen that, but Operation Dragon um, is a brand new book that just came out.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know, but that would be interesting to.
Yeah. So wait a minute, I have a copy here. I'm sorry, I should have had one. But he and Woolsey, who was the head of the CIA, together wrote a book, Operation Dragon, that's just getting some interesting attention. So I'm getting people contacting me saying, "Oh, we see Pacepa's got a new book," and I'm having to give them very sad news about him. He certainly tried to use his voice as strongly as you could ever hope anybody would do.
I was just curious, was he a rich man? Pacepa, was he a rich man? Like, was he a millionaire or whatever? Was he living a luxury, as you said, in Romania, who was probably living a luxury life? But was he living a luxury life in the U.S., in Florida, probably?
He lived a life that would be befitting of a retired professional. I mean, not certainly, you know, no mansion or anything like that, but he had a nice apartment.
So he was okay from this point of view.
Yeah,
Financially.
definitely okay.
How do you see the tomorrow's world? I mean, how do you think that the world will look like 20 years from now?
Well,
I know it's a tough question. So
it's a very tough question. I mean, I know the United States more than the world, but I said in the United States, we are being torn at the seams. I mean, there are people who are very progressive in some of their policies. There are people who are much more conservative, and we're not meeting in the middle very nicely right now. And so I don't know that that's going to result in violence, but I don't know. I'm not certain there won't be some. I mean, there's been some, so you know there'll be some. But I hope that we will begin to recognize some of the problems that we're facing. I think people do know that there has been disinformation involved in fomenting the discourse that we currently face. I think people on each side think it's more on the other side, so we're kind of pointing in different directions. But I think people are very concerned about primarily Russian and Chinese false information influencing our politics, and I think, you know, we're all I think we thought that Americans were a little late in figuring out. We all thought the Cold War was over and there was going to be a peace dividend and people were going to hold hands and sing songs together. And suddenly we're realizing that's not quite how it's happening. And it's not with outside military aggression, but it's with internal disinformation. You know, when we wrote the book, so 10 years ago, disinformation was largely an unknown word in the United States. You'd type it on your computer and it would change because it was not in the system. And today you can't read a newspaper without reading a couple articles about disinformation. I mean, it's become a well understood. Well, it's become a term. Pacepa was very precise about how he defined disinformation, but the word certainly is used a lot today.
Thank you very much, Professor Rychlak. Do you have a message for the Romanian people who are watching us right now? I mean, something you would like to say to them?
No, I mean, I'll tell you, you know, Rychlak, you know, I'm a East Central or Eastern European heritage. Because I got to know Pacepa, I have an abiding affection for Romania, as did he. You know, he was a secret Catholic even when he was in power. So there's a rich heritage in terms of the land, in terms of the people, in terms of the faith. Disinformation is designed to make people question those things, question their history, their heritage, their institutions, their churches, their governments. You can see through disinformation. It's hard. It's not easy, but you can if you have faith in who you are and what your institutions are, what your nation is. Romania is a great nation. I will forever hold it in my heart because of what I've studied and what I've learned. And I wish you all the best and hope I get to visit it one day.
Yeah, why not? It's a very nice country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.